Have you ever witnessed a moment so dramatic that it felt like stepping onto the set of a gripping soap opera? Picture this. A proud father-to-be strolls through a swanky nursery showroom. Only he's not with his pregnant wife, but with his glamorous mistress. Then, like a hurricane, the wife appears in the store's doorway, flanked by the furious landlord clutching eviction papers. Betrayal secrets and desperation collide in a single spine-chilling confrontation. This story is one for the ages, a tangled mess of lies, love, and heartbreak. Buckle up for the most turbulent ride of loyalty and deception you've ever heard. Charlotte Caldwell rested her hand gently on her growing belly, a mix of excitement and anxiety pulsing through her veins. She stood in the small living room of their two-bedroom apartment in Chicago's Ravenswood neighborhood, scanning the clutter she had once hoped to replace with shining new baby items. The faint hum of traffic outside wove through the cracks in the old windows. It was a far cry from the dream house she and her husband Ethan had once envisioned, but she reassured herself that love would make up for anything lacking in their finances. Truth be told, something had been off about Ethan for weeks. Charlotte could sense it in his tone whenever she mentioned baby preparations. He would brush off her concerns. "Don't worry, I've got it all planned," but she could smell the anxiety rolling off him in waves. Bills were piling up on the small kitchen table. The rent was late for the second month in a row, and their landlord, Mr. Miguel Sanchez, had already sent 2 warning notices. In spite of all this, Ethan insisted they were fine, always deflecting to vague excuses, a late paycheck, a friend who borrowed money, or a one-time emergency expense. But Charlotte knew his patterns too well. Over the years, she'd discovered that Ethan was great at painting a rosy picture even when the house was on fire. The day's tension began with a phone call. Charlotte had just finished folding the baby clothes gifted by her friend Emily Winters when she noticed Ethan step out of the front door, cell phone pressed tightly to his ear. He claimed it was his boss, Mark O'Connor, from the real estate firm, but something in his voice betrayed him. Could she be imagining things? Possibly. But at 5 months pregnant, her instincts had never been sharper. She walked to the door, cracked it slightly, and overheard fragments. "That's perfect. I can meet you at the showroom." No, she won't be there." It was enough to tighten the knot in Charlotte's stomach. Why would Ethan's boss call him to a showroom, and why mention that Charlotte wouldn't be there? She tried to tamp down her suspicions. Ethan might be planning a surprise baby gift or a special reveal. Maybe all these months of secrecy were building up to a big romantic gesture. She tried to believe that. That night, she tested his reaction with a simple question. "Any leads on the baby furniture, honey?" Ethan's eyes flickered with a momentary fear. He quickly composed himself, plastering on a smile. "I'm taking care of it," he assured her. "My boss recommended a place downtown. We'll get the best for our baby." His words were sweet, but his tone was forced. In the pit of her stomach, she felt a tremor of dread, and with every day that passed, it only grew stronger. As Charlotte lay awake that night, she thought about the precariousness of their situation. The missed rent, the hush-hush phone calls, the uneasy guilt flickering behind Ethan's eyes. She placed a hand over her abdomen, feeling the faintest kick from within. It brought tears to her eyes, tears of both wonder and apprehension. She was falling in love with this unborn child, dreaming of the day she would hold them in her arms. But a part of her couldn't help wondering if her marriage was solid enough to withstand the trials that were waiting just around the corner. Before drifting off, her thoughts circled back to the landlord, Miguel Sanchez. He had always been cordial, but he ran a strict ship when it came to finances. The last thing Charlotte wanted was an eviction, especially while pregnant. She resolved to take matters into her own hands. Tomorrow she would call the landlord, double-check the status of their rent, and then confront Ethan with the truth. No more secrets. She intended to protect her baby no matter the cost. Little did Charlotte know that the truth she sought was far more devastating than anything she could have imagined, and her resolve would soon be tested in a way that would change her life forever. Violet Patterson slid behind the wheel of her sleek silver Lexus, eyes alight with anticipation. Dressed in a chic navy blue blazer, she exuded the confidence of a woman who knew exactly how to tilt every situation in her favor. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the steering wheel. She glanced at the text on her phone. Ethan. Meet me at the Willow & Cumbedy Baby Boutique at 2 p.m. Parking garage on 3rd. Just the sight of his name brought a smirk to her lips. She was fond of Ethan's boyish charm and how easily he was swayed by her slightest touch. Though she wouldn't admit it aloud, she relished the thrill of the affair as much as she enjoyed the potential chaos it might stir. Violet had met Ethan 6 months prior at a work event for real estate professionals. She was a new interior decorator, forging relationships with local realtors. One glass of champagne, too many playful banter, and soon she found herself lingering close to Ethan on the hotel balcony. Their conversation had started innocently about housing trends in Chicago market shifts and the best local architecture, but underneath it all, there was an unmistakable current of flirtation. When he confided that his wife was pregnant, Violet had only grown more intrigued. She liked the allure of the forbidden. Having an affair with a married man wasn't exactly on her bucket list, but it wasn't a deal-breaker either. For Violet, half the excitement lay in what was hidden: the stolen kisses, the hushed phone calls, the sneaking around. She convinced herself that Ethan was different from the usual men who pursued her. He was sweet, a little naive, and quite generous when it came to pleasing her whims. Yet behind Violet's seductive exterior lurked a hardened survivor. She had grown up in a broken home in St. Louis, raised by a single mother who struggled to put food on the table. Violet learned early on that security and comfort were luxuries not everyone could afford. She vowed never to let herself be poor or powerless again. At times, she'd manipulate men to get what she wanted: a better contract, a higher commission, a more lavish lifestyle. And Ethan Caldwell was the perfect tool. He was reliable enough that she could trust him with small secrets and gullible enough to believe her rehearsed lines of devotion. Today, though, Violet sensed a shift in their dynamic. Ethan had told her that he wanted to discuss the future. She wondered if it meant a bigger commitment. The notion both thrilled and unsettled her. She still remembered how he'd grown quiet whenever his wife's pregnancy was mentioned. He was racked with guilt, she could see it in his eyes. But guilt alone wouldn't stop him from continuing their affair. In fact, it often made him cling to her even more tightly. Arriving at the plush Willow & Cumbedy Baby Boutique, Violet felt an odd mixture of curiosity and triumph. They were about to pick out nursery furniture, something presumably for Ethan's child with Charlotte. The moral lines blurred in Violet's head, but she brushed it aside. She entered the boutique, the sweet lullaby music piped in overhead, pastel-colored cribs and rocking chairs on display. She inhaled the faint scent of lavender detergent. "This is nice," she thought aloud, running her fingers along the soft cushion of a glider. Then she caught sight of Ethan near the plush animal toys. The moment he saw her, his face brightened. He looked cautious, but the corners of his mouth lifted, revealing a mix of happiness and nerves. "Hey," he greeted softly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. She arched an eyebrow in playful admonishment. "Relax, Ethan. No one here knows us." He nodded but seemed on edge. "I know. It's just, I'm worried." Violet placed a delicate hand on his arm, her touch both comforting and controlling. "You said we need to talk about the future." He hesitated, then looked around at the baby furniture displays, his eyes brimming with conflict. "Yeah, let's pick out what we need first and then we'll talk." Even as Ethan began pointing out potential cribs and color themes, Violet could sense his hesitation. In the pit of her stomach, she suspected that something big was brewing just beyond her peripheral vision. Maybe his wife had begun to suspect. Maybe Ethan had finally come to terms with the shaky ground they stood on. But Violet pushed these thoughts away, losing herself in the thrill of being an integral part of such an intimate decision for Ethan's soon-to-be-born child. She was the mistress stepping into a role meant for a wife, and she couldn't help feeling a twisted satisfaction in that fact. But fates have a way of colliding. Today, those hidden truths were about to explode into the open, leaving all three of them, Husband, wife, and mistress gasping for control in a situation that threatened to crumble right beneath their feet. Charlotte dialed Miguel Sanchez's number early the next morning. The phone rang twice before he picked up with his familiar gruff greeting, "Sanchez here." "Who's this?" "Hi, Mr. Sanchez." "It's Charlotte Caldwell," she said nervously. She rarely made these calls. Ethan usually handled financial discussions. "I wanted to check on our rent status. I know we're behind, but I'd like to figure out a plan to get caught up." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "Mrs. Caldwell, I've tried calling your husband several times. The rent's gone unpaid for nearly 2 months. I'm not running a charity. If payment isn't made by the end of the week, I'm afraid I'll have to proceed with eviction." Charlotte closed her eyes, heart pounding. "Is there any way we can have a bit more time?" "My husband, he's been dealing with some work issues. We'll pay you everything as soon as possible." She winced at her own words, not entirely sure how they would come up with the money. Miguel's voice was sympathetic but firm. "I understand you're pregnant and I don't want to see you out on the street. But business is business. I have a waiting list for the unit. If you can't pay in full, I may not have a choice." She thanked him for his honesty and hung up, numbness creeping into her limbs. She desperately wanted to believe Ethan had a plan. For years she'd trusted his ability to make ends meet, even if that meant juggling debts. But now, with a baby on the way and no clear answers, Charlotte felt trapped. There had to be a reason Ethan was so secretive. That very day, Charlotte decided she wouldn't remain in the dark any longer. She slipped out of their apartment and hailed a cab to Ethan's real estate office downtown. Walking into the sleek lobby with polished marble floors and modern art, she approached the receptionist, Linda Owens, a kindly woman in her 50s. "Hi, Linda," Charlotte greeted. "Is Ethan in? I'd like to surprise him for lunch." Linda offered a tight smile. "Oh, Mrs. Caldwell. Hi. Actually, Ethan is out. He stepped away with Violet Patterson." She lowered her voice slightly. "They were discussing some interior designs for a new listing, I believe." Charlotte blinked, trying to keep her composure. She had heard the name Violet Patterson mentioned before Ethan had spoken of her as an interior designer he was collaborating with. But the knowledge that he was out with Violet again, especially when everything at home was teetering on the edge, made Charlotte uneasy. "Oh, of course," she managed. "Any idea when they'll be back?" Linda gave a small shrug. "He didn't say, but they left about an hour ago." Charlotte forced a smile and thanked Linda before exiting into the bustling Chicago street. She found a nearby cafe and settled into a corner seat, mind-churning. The way Linda had lowered her voice on Violet Patterson set off alarm bells. Maybe it was just office gossip. But Charlotte's intuition nagged at her, echoing a suspicion she could no longer ignore. Could Ethan be having an affair? Was that why he never seemed to have money for rent? She recalled the secret phone calls, the hush-hush texts, and his lack of interest in the baby's upcoming arrival. She pulled out her cell phone and searched for Violet Patterson's professional website. Sure enough, it was easy to find. There were photos of Violet, stunning, poised, and successful, standing in lavish homes, describing her design philosophy. Charlotte's heart twisted. This woman had everything she herself lacked at the moment: confidence, stability, and a flair for the luxurious. Anxiety threaded through her like a hot wire, but Charlotte didn't want to jump to conclusions. As easy as it was to suspect an affair, there could be other explanations for Ethan's strange behavior. Perhaps Violet was just a valued colleague. Then again, Charlotte remembered the day she overheard Ethan's phone call about meeting at a showroom. Why would he be picking out furniture with Violet? Before leaving the cafe, Charlotte placed a call to an old friend, Pamela Reed, who worked part-time at Willow & Cumberty Baby Boutique. If Ethan was indeed planning something for the baby, maybe Pamela would have seen him. Pamela picked up, cheerful as ever. "Pam, it's Charlotte. I know it's a weird question, but have you seen Ethan in the store lately? I might have missed him." There was a pause. "Charlotte, he was here yesterday," Pamela said gently, reluctance creeping into her voice. He was with a woman. They seemed pretty cozy. I didn't know if it was a friend or a colleague, but they were picking out baby furniture from what I overheard. Charlotte's throat went dry. I see. Thank you, Pam. She hung up her fears all but confirmed. Ethan had gone to pick nursery furniture without her, and he hadn't gone alone. She thought about the rent, the eviction threat, the swirling confusion of finances. Now there was a potential mistress in the picture. Anger bloomed in her chest alongside heartbreak. She placed both hands on her belly, silently promising her unborn child that she would find a way out of this mess. Little did she know that her next moves would lead her right into the eye of a storm, one that would change the course of all their lives in a single explosive confrontation. In the cluttered office of Ethan Caldwell, tension built like storm clouds on a hot summer's day. He slumped at his desk, head in his hands, ignoring the rumble of conversations beyond his door. On his computer screen, he toggled between overdue rent notices, mounting credit card bills, and an empty personal checking account. He felt the walls closing in. The child he and Charlotte were expecting was supposed to be a beacon of hope. Yet with every passing month, their finances spiraled downward. Ethan had once been a promising agent at Mark O'Connor Real Estate, known for his charm and salesmanship, but the last 2 quarters had been catastrophic. Deals fell through, a significant commercial contract had been snatched by a rival, and Ethan had gambled their savings on marketing efforts that yielded nothing. Amid this downward swirl, Violet Patterson waltzed into his life, charismatic, impeccably dressed, offering him a taste of a different world. When they first kissed in that hotel hallway, Ethan told himself it was a mistake he'd never repeat. But he was drawn to her confidence, and Violet promised to connect him with high-end clients in need of luxury properties. She assured him that together they would revitalize his career. He believed it, or at least wanted to, so he accepted her flirtations and eventually her more intimate overtures, all the while convinced that it was purely transactional, just business with benefits. But he was sorely mistaken. Violet had proven adept at milking him for every ounce of emotional and financial security he could spare. She wasn't after marriage, not exactly. She wanted influence, a powerful partner, and the thrill of being someone's irresistible secret. In the beginning, Ethan found it flattering. But as his finances dwindled, Violet's demands did not. She wanted better dinners, more gifts, more time spent together, even as Charlotte's due date crept closer. Each day, Ethan felt himself slipping further down a moral and financial pit. He rubbed his temples, recalling the latest argument he'd had with Violet. She had grown impatient with his inability to provide. "What happened to that big listing you promised me?" she hissed a few nights ago as they lingered in her Lexus. "I was supposed to design the interiors. Now you're telling me it fell through. You're making me look bad, Ethan." He'd tried to soothe her, promising that the next deal would be bigger and better. Yet he had nothing to back it up but hollow words and a winning smile that was losing its power by the day. The sound of his desk phone jolted him from his thoughts. He checked the caller ID, Miguel Sanchez. Quickly, he grabbed the receiver. "Ethan Caldwell," he said, trying to sound composed. "Mr. Caldwell." Miguel's voice was brisk. "We need a payment soon, or I'll have to file eviction. I spoke to your wife." Ethan's heart lurched. "My wife?" "She called you indeed. She's worried, but I told her I have to stay firm on the policy. I'm calling you as a courtesy. Get the rent in by week's end or vacate the premises." Ethan swallowed hard. I'll figure something out." He set the phone down, a wave of nausea rolling through him. Charlotte knew about the rent. The carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and he had no plan to fix it. He considered calling Violet for help. Maybe she had a friend or client who could float him a loan. But the shame curdled in his gut. How had he let it get this far? He closed his eyes, seeing Charlotte's anxious face in his mind, remembering how she used to glow with excitement about the baby. He pictured their wedding day, her shy smile as they danced, the promise he had made to always protect her. That promise felt like a cruel joke now. Guilt pressed heavily on his chest, mixing with fear and desperation, until he could barely breathe. Ethan realized he stood at a crossroads. He could come clean to Charlotte, beg for her forgiveness, and hope they could salvage their finances together. Or he could double down on his secrets, hoping for a miraculous real estate commission that might bail him out. Part of him knew the time for miracles was gone. The truth was a runaway train barreling toward them. If he didn't confront it now, it would crash through their lives at full speed, leaving destruction in its wake. With trembling fingers, he grabbed his jacket and left the office, ignoring the curious stares from coworkers. He had to find Violet. Maybe she could help him land a quick design contract that would bring in enough to cover the rent. That was the only option he allowed himself to consider. The rest, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the moral catastrophe, he shoved to the back of his mind. For now. On a sunny afternoon, Ethan met Violet at a small bistro tucked between high-rise condominiums and art galleries. The open-air patio overlooked Lake Michigan, giving the illusion of tranquility. But for Ethan, tranquility was impossible. "Thanks for coming," he said, pulling out a chair for Violet. She offered him a practiced smile, removing her designer sunglasses. "You sounded stressed," she replied, studying his face. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. You've been on edge for weeks." Ethan winced. He'd confided more in Violet than he ever intended. "I need help, Violet. My landlord's threatening eviction." "And Charlotte?" She knows. Violet's eyes flashed. "Not everything, but she knows we're behind on rent. She's worried. And I'm worried too. I can't let her lose the apartment, not when she's pregnant." Violet crossed her arms, leaning back in her seat. A cool breeze swept strands of her auburn hair across her face. "So what do you want from me?" He swallowed the lump in his throat. "You mentioned you have contacts, wealthy clients who might need a quick sale or a new property. I need a big commission fast." For a moment, Violet looked thoughtful. "There's a possibility. I know a developer, James Garrett, who's shopping for a rehab property near the Gold Coast. If you can snag the contract, you could net a substantial commission. But Ethan, this is not a guarantee. And you'd have to work with me on the interior design portion. He doesn't want to hire separate people." Ethan exhaled with relief. "That's good. That's something. I'll do whatever it takes." Violet's lips curved into a small, shrewd smile. "We'll meet him tomorrow. I'll make the introduction." The conversation lulled as the waiter brought them glasses of sparkling water. Violet sipped hers, expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward. "Ethan," she said softly, "I want you to leave her." He froze. "What?" Her tone hardened. "You can't keep living this double life. If you want to focus on me, on us, then do it. If not, end it cleanly and deal with your marriage. But this limbo is draining. And if we land this client together, I want to be sure you're committed." He opened his mouth, words failing to form. The idea of leaving Charlotte, his pregnant wife, felt unthinkable. Yet part of him, the desperate part, wondered if extricating himself from one entanglement would solve his problems. But how could he walk away from Charlotte now in the middle of her pregnancy? I need time to figure things out," he mumbled. Violet arched an eyebrow. "Time is exactly what you don't have, Ethan." In that moment, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, Charlotte calling. Anxiety sliced through him, and he let it go to voicemail. Violet noticed her gaze sharp. "You see," she whispered, voice tinged with frustration. "This is what I mean." Ethan reached across the table, gently squeezing Violet's hand. "Please, can we just focus on landing James Garrett? It's my last shot at catching up on rent." Violet pursed her lips but eventually nodded. "Fine, but don't forget our talk." Little did they know that across town, Charlotte was already setting in motion a plan of her own. After discovering that Ethan and Violet were involved more intimately than she'd dared suspect, she reached out to none other than their landlord, Miguel Sanchez, for legal advice on how to handle the eviction, and more importantly, how to confront her husband in a place he least expected. With her father's help, she also consulted a family lawyer, preparing for the worst in case divorce was imminent. By day's end, an unspoken countdown had begun. Every conversation, every plan, every fleeting hope was pushing them closer to an explosive confrontation. They were all circling the same drain, too blind or too proud to break free. The next time they met, truths would be laid bare in a fashion none could ignore. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a deceptively beautiful day that offered little hint of the emotional tempest brewing. Ethan convinced Violet to accompany him back to Willow & Company Baby Boutique under the guise of finalizing a design concept for James Garrett's prospective property. The truth was more tangled. Ethan also wanted to show Violet the high-end nursery furniture, claiming it might help them pitch a family-friendly angle to their wealthy client. As they walked into the boutique's airy display area, pastel-colored cribs and whimsical wall decals surrounded them. Violet scanned the room with a practiced eye, rattling off design opinions. Ethan nodded absently, half aware of the sales associates bustling around them. His mind was locked on the rent deadline, the looming eviction, and Charlotte's increasingly urgent calls that he kept ignoring. In a back aisle, he spotted a crib that struck him as both elegant and sturdy, exactly the kind he'd have picked with Charlotte if their relationship hadn't descended into secrecy and lies. A pang of guilt struck him. This was supposed to be a joyous moment, selecting the perfect bed for his child. Instead, he was here with his mistress disguised as a client meeting. "What do you think?" he asked Violet, running his palm over the lacquered wood. She tilted her head, lips pursed. "It's nice. Modern lines. But personally, I prefer something with more flair. James might like something that says luxury baby suite." Ethan managed a tight laugh. "Right. Luxury baby suite." Suddenly, the click of high heels on polished flooring caught their attention. Ethan glanced over his shoulder and felt his blood run cold. Charlotte stood there looking pale but resolute, her eyes fixed on them. At her side loomed Miguel Sanchez, clutching a folded set of papers. Charlotte, Ethan's voice cracked. He couldn't fathom how she'd known he'd be here, and with Violet no less. His wife's lips trembled with suppressed emotion, her free hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. "So it's true," she said, voice tight. "You've been sneaking around with her. You came here to choose nursery furniture with your mistress." Violet, caught off guard, tried to appear composed, but her eyes betrayed fear and shock. She scrambled for a quick explanation. "Charlotte, it's not what you think. This is for a work project." "Don't." Charlotte snapped, her voice echoing off the pastel walls. "Don't insult my intelligence. You think I haven't noticed Ethan's late hours, the calls, the money disappearing?" She inhaled shakily. "And then I find out our rent is months behind and we're on the verge of eviction." Miguel Sanchez stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, I gave you ample warning. I'm here with official eviction papers. As of today, you're required to vacate if you can't produce the full amount owed within 24 hours. He looked at Charlotte, his expression sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell." Ethan's mind whirled. His heart hammered against his ribcage. "Wait, we can work this out," he pleaded. "I have a deal coming soon, Violet and I." "Your deal is too late," Charlotte interrupted, tears glistening in her eyes. "And you brought her here. This was supposed to be our moment." Onlookers began to gather, whispers rippling through the boutique. The manager, Pamela's co-worker, hovered awkwardly nearby, uncertain if she should intervene. Violet, sensing her usual poise slipping, tried to pull Ethan aside. "Let's not do this here," she hissed. But Charlotte's fury fueled her determination. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. "How long, Ethan? When did this start?" He tried to speak, but words failed him. In the silence, Charlotte's hand drifted from her belly to the eviction papers clutched in Miguel's grip. She turned to the landlord. "You said 24 hours, right?" Miguel nodded. "I'm afraid so." With a bitter laugh, Charlotte looked back at Ethan, tears sliding down her cheeks. "So this is our child's legacy, a homeless mother and a father who'd rather play house with his mistress than face his problems." The air felt charged, each second ticking by in slow motion, as the three of them stood in a messy, heartbreaking standoff. Nearby, a pastel crib with a musical mobile tinkled a lullaby that clashed horribly with the tension in the air. Ethan glanced around desperately, wishing the floor would swallow him up. Everywhere he looked, eyes stared back in judgment. The truth was laid bare. He was a husband failing his wife, a father failing his unborn child, and a man tangled in an affair that only worsened his downfall. As Charlotte turned away, sobs choking her words, Ethan reached out, but there was no solace to offer. The damage was done, and the next move would change all their lives forever. Silence fell on Willow and Cone. Baby Boutique, the background lullabies, an ironic soundtrack to the chaos unfolding in real time. Charlotte let out a ragged breath, trying to steady herself as her pregnant body threatened to betray her with dizziness. The stress was overwhelming, but anger fueled her, kept her standing. Violet made a tentative step forward. "Charlotte, look. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Don't you dare," Charlotte hissed, wiping tears from her cheeks. "You have the nerve to talk about my baby's nursery while you sneak around with my husband." A few shoppers gasped. Even the boutique manager looked mortified. Violet's face reddened, her veneer of calm slipping. "Ethan told me you two were on the verge of separation," she said, voice faltering. "That you drifted apart after the pregnancy. He said—" "He lied?" Charlotte spat back, glancing at Ethan in pure disbelief. "Is that what you've been telling her?" "That we were separated." Ethan caught between them, swallowed hard. "It's not like that, Charlotte. I never said we were separated. I just—" He struggled for words. "I was scared. I didn't know how to pay the bills, how to handle the baby. Violet offered to help with my listings, and I got in over my head." Charlotte felt the weight of betrayal crush her, but she forced herself to stay composed for the baby's sake. "You told me to trust you with our finances, with our future, and you squandered everything, our savings, our marriage, all for this." She motioned toward Violet, who winced. Miguel Sanchez, the landlord, cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable in the middle of the emotional firefight. "Look, maybe we should discuss this somewhere else. I'm only here for the eviction matter." "I'll have the money," Ethan blurted, desperation in his voice. "Give me just a few days and I'll figure it out. I have a deal coming, I promise." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "Ethan, you've been saying that for weeks. I'm not heartless, but I can't wait forever." Charlotte's eyes burned with tears. She looked from Miguel to Ethan. "What deal? Another pipe dream? Another collaboration with your mistress?" Her throat tightened. "You were supposed to be focusing on your real job. You were supposed to be taking care of us." Suddenly the tension erupted. Violet scoffed, turning the tables. "You don't know what he's been dealing with. You think you're the only person who cares about him? You're pregnant and making demands while he's drowning in debt, trying to keep his head above water." Charlotte's eyes went wide with fury. "You have no right," she said, voice shaking. "You stole him at his weakest moment. You made it worse." Ethan tried to intervene, raising both hands. "Enough, both of you. This isn't helping." But the two women glared at each other, their anger radiating like heat. The entire boutique seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Charlotte turned back to Ethan with a quiet intensity that was more terrifying than her earlier rage. "I can't do this," she said, voice trembling. "I can't continue to be humiliated. Consider this the end. I don't care about your deal anymore. You can go and chase fantasies with Violet for all I care." Ethan's panic flared. He reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "Charlotte, please don't talk like that. I'm sorry. I made a mistake." Miguel stepped in, pressing the eviction papers against Ethan's chest. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, but here's the official notice. You have 24 hours or I file with the court." Ethan stared at the papers, chest constricting. Violet hovered behind him, uncertain, her usual confidence in shreds. Charlotte inhaled sharply, tears brimming. In her mind, she saw the future she once believed in: a happy marriage, a stable home, a safe place to bring her child into the world. Now it felt like a cruel illusion. Without another word, she turned and walked out, her head held high even as her tears flowed. Miguel gave Ethan a silent, regretful nod before following her. A hush fell over the showroom as every onlooker tried to process the drama they had just witnessed. For Ethan, the world seemed to collapse in on itself. He turned to see violet arms, folded eyes flashing with a mix of defiance and guilt. The pastel lullaby playing overhead seemed to mock him, a haunting reminder of everything he was losing: his wife, his child, his home. He'd thought he was fighting for more security, more options, and more freedom. Instead, he'd ended up with chaos beyond his worst nightmares. That evening, Charlotte found herself alone in a modest motel room on the outskirts of Chicago, the neon sign outside casting an eerie glow on the walls. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting protectively over her belly. Swollen feet and an aching heart weighed her down, but she refused to cry anymore. Through her tears, she had resolved to be stronger for her baby. She'd called her friend Emily Winters, who promised to come by soon with food and moral support. Until then, Charlotte tried to steady her thoughts and figure out her next move. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Ethan slumped on a bar stool in a dimly lit lounge, half listening to the soft jazz playing in the background. He stared at his phone at the dozen missed calls from Charlotte that he'd ignored earlier in the day, each symbolizing a moment he'd chosen deceit over honesty. Now all he wanted was to hear her voice, to beg her forgiveness, but he didn't know where she was. She wouldn't answer his calls. Violet slid into the seat beside him, ordering a martini and casting him a sidelong glance. "Well," she said, her tone taut, "that was quite a spectacle." Ethan exhaled. "I should have told her the truth months ago. I was trying to fix it before it exploded." Violet arched a brow. "And now look where we are. Eviction, a destroyed marriage. All for what?" She sipped her martini, her confidence returning now that they were out of the public eye. "I told you to choose Ethan. You never did." He eyed her wearily. "Don't pin this entirely on me. You pushed me for bigger deals. You encouraged me to spend money I didn't have." "I encouraged you to invest in our future," she corrected, swirling the drink in her hand. "But you lied to me too, Ethan. You promised me success, but you never told me the situation was this bad. We're both at fault." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their mutual mistakes pressing down. Finally, Violet spoke, voice tinged with desperation. "You know we can still salvage the James Garrett deal. That could solve the rent, maybe even open doors for us." She lowered her gaze. "But you need to be all in, or this is pointless." Ethan stared at the amber liquid in his glass. There was a time when that proposition would have excited him. Now it felt hollow. Could any amount of money repair the damage? Could success with Violet ever fill the void left by his betrayal of Charlotte? He thought back to the first time he'd seen Charlotte's pregnancy test come back positive, how he'd held her in his arms as she cried tears of joy. He remembered promising her the best life possible, determined to give her and the child everything they deserved. That memory burned like a knife to the gut. "I don't know," he muttered. "I need to see Charlotte, talk to her. Maybe I can still fix this somehow." Violet's expression darkened. "You want her, but you want me too. That's not how it works." He glared at her, frustration boiling over. "I never wanted to leave my wife. I got lost. I made a mistake with you. And now—" He downed his drink in one gulp. "Now my entire life is ruined." Violet stiffened, her eyes glittering with unshed tears. "Fine," she said, grabbing her purse. "Go chase after her, try to make amends. But don't come running back to me when she slams the door in your face." She tossed a few bills onto the bar and swept out her heels, clicking angrily against the polished floor. Ethan watched her go, his thoughts a tangled mess of regret and longing. He couldn't help but wonder if he truly loved Violet, or if he was merely enthralled by the excitement she brought into his life. The illusions had shattered, and now he was left with the grim reality of impending eviction, a pregnant wife who despised him, and a mistress who demanded more than he could give. Yet a small flicker of hope lingered in his chest. If there was even a slim chance that Charlotte would forgive him, he had to try. But he also knew that the truths he'd revealed were too ugly to ignore. No matter what came next, the man he was before the ambitious, charming real estate agent was gone. And in the ruins of his life, he had to decide who he would become. Charlotte met with a lawyer the next morning, her eyes raw from sleepless hours of heartbreak and worry. Sitting in a cramped office with old law textbooks lining the shelves, she felt like a fragile shell of herself. The lawyer, Marissa Jeffries, listened attentively as Charlotte poured out her story. The affair, the overdue rent, the eviction looming over her pregnant head. "You have options," Marissa began gently. "You can file for a legal separation request, spousal support, and ensure that your husband contributes financially toward the child's upbringing. However, these matters take time." Charlotte nodded, placing a hand on her stomach. "I just can't believe it's come to this. I want what's best for my baby, but how can I trust Ethan now? And what if he can't pay?" Marissa took off her reading glasses, resting them on the desk. "If he's employed, we can garnish wages. The court can enforce child support, but eviction is separate. Unless you have somewhere else to stay, you may need short-term housing." Friends, family. Charlotte recalled her mother's tiny condo in Michigan. It was cramped and far from her doctor. She was reluctant to move there, but it might be her only option. "I have a friend, Emily, who's offered to let me stay with her for a bit," she said. "But that's not a permanent solution." By the time Charlotte left the office, she felt slightly better armed, but still emotionally battered. She needed to talk to Ethan one last time, if only to clarify her next steps. She called him, and surprisingly, he picked up on the first ring. "Charlotte." His voice was hushed, filled with relief. "Where are you? Are you okay?" She hesitated, tears pricking her eyes at the familiar concern in his tone. "I'm safe. I need to see you. There's too much we need to discuss." They agreed to meet at a small park by the lake, a place they'd once loved for its peacefulness. When Charlotte arrived, she spotted Ethan sitting on a bench, head bowed, looking nothing like the confident realtor she'd married. She walked over, her heart a war zone of anger, sadness, and the faintest glimmer of affection. They sat in silence for a long moment, the breeze off the lake rustling the autumn leaves. Finally, Ethan reached out to take her hand, but she pulled away. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears shining in his eyes. "I never meant for this to happen. Everything spiraled out of control." Charlotte swallowed hard, forcing her tears back. "You betrayed me, Ethan. You promised to take care of us, and instead you turned our lives into a nightmare. I can't trust you anymore." He nodded, visibly shaken. "I know. I can't expect your forgiveness right now. But please let me help with the baby. I'll pay rent. I'll find a way." She let out a trembling breath. "You keep saying that, but the money isn't there. I spoke with a lawyer. I'm considering legal separation. Maybe a divorce if things don't change." Her voice cracked. "I never wanted our child to grow up in a broken home." Ethan buried his head in his hands. "I'll fix it, Charlotte. I have a lead on a big deal. Just give me a little more time." "Time. That's all you've ever asked for," she shot back, fury mixing with her grief. "Meanwhile, I'm the one left packing up our place, juggling doctor's appointments, and wondering where I'm going to live. We have 24 hours to come up with the rent, or we're out." He inhaled sharply, pulling out his phone. "Let me try. Maybe I can get an advance or a loan." His fingers trembled as he scrolled through contacts, searching for a lifeline. Charlotte turned away, staring at the water's gentle waves. She recalled the early days of their relationship, how safe and cherished she'd felt in Ethan's arms. Now all that remained was the raw ache of betrayal and the pressing need to secure a future for her unborn child, whether Ethan was part of it or not. The eviction deadline loomed like a thundercloud over Charlotte's head. She spent the morning packing boxes, her hands shaking as she sorted through the remains of what was once a home. Each object felt like a memory she was being forced to abandon: wedding photos, baby clothes she'd once folded with hope, even Ethan's favorite mug. Now everything felt heavy with loss. Emily arrived with a borrowed pickup truck, her hug silent but fierce. "You don't have to go through this alone," she whispered, helping Charlotte tape shut the last box. "Thank you, Emily. I never thought it would come to this." Charlotte's voice trembled, but she blinked back tears. I'm not waiting for a sheriff to knock. I need to leave on my own terms. Meanwhile, Ethan's night had been a sleepless blur of desperate calls and messages. At dawn, he finally secured a meeting with James Garrett, the one client who could make a difference. Violet was already waiting in the lobby of Garrett's high-rise office, eyes tired but determined. Inside the sleek conference room, Ethan pitched as if his life depended on it. It's a Lincoln Park listing, prime property, and Violet's design vision will elevate it even further. Violet presented her plans with poise, the pair working in unison. Garrett listened, flipping through the proposal. It sounds promising, he admitted. Let's schedule a walkthrough tomorrow. But Caldwell, your recent numbers worry me. I need results, not promises. Ethan nodded, feeling the pressure of hours slipping away. You'll have results. I just need a chance. As they left, Violet squeezed his hand. If he signs, you'll have the money. It's almost over. But Ethan's optimism faltered as he returned to the apartment complex, seeing Charlotte carrying boxes to Emily's truck. His heart twisted at the sight of her struggling with the weight, her belly unmistakably round under her coat. Charlotte, let me help, he called, jogging over. She met his eyes with a look of exhaustion. You've helped enough, Ethan. I'm moving out. I can't keep waiting for you to pull off some last-minute miracle. She brushed past him, loading another box. Ethan followed, guilt thick in his throat. I'm sorry. I did everything I could. I have a buyer. If he signs tomorrow, we'll have enough for rent. She shook her head, the last thread of hope snapping. I can't keep hearing tomorrow anymore. I have a baby to think about. Just then, Miguel Sanchez's car pulled up. The landlord walked over, carrying eviction papers. I'm sorry, but time's up, Ethan. I filed with the court this morning. Ethan pleaded. Please, I'm so close. One more day. Miguel shook his head. I gave you every chance. I have to do my job. Charlotte climbed into the truck, Emily behind the wheel. This is over, she told Ethan quietly. I can't keep being humiliated. I'm staying with Emily until I figure out what's next. Ethan stood motionless as they drove away, the echo of his wife's words ringing in his ears. He returned to the empty apartment, sinking onto the floor amid half-packed boxes. It was all gone, his marriage, his home, his sense of self-worth. That night, Ethan's desperation drove him to dial Mark O'Connor, his old boss, hoping for an advance. Mark, I have a sale pending with Garrett. Just a little help. Mark sighed. Caldwell, I can't. Company policy, no commission until a deal closes. Get your life together, then we'll talk. The next morning, Ethan was jolted awake by his phone. Mr. Caldwell, this is Miguel. I'm coming with the locksmith, the landlord said. Wait, please. But the line went dead. Realizing there was nothing left to salvage, Ethan packed the last of his things into his car, avoiding the eyes of neighbors as he left. The apartment, once full of laughter and dreams, was now just another empty unit. He drove to Lincoln Park to meet Violet and James Garrett. The property was perfect, the kind of place that under other circumstances would have excited him. Garrett seemed pleased, nodding along as Violet described her plans. This is exactly what I want. Draft up the paperwork, Caldwell. If everything checks out, I'll sign by the end of the day. Relief threatened to bring Ethan to his knees. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. But as Garrett left, Ethan remained seated, drained. Violet slid beside him. You did it. This sale will solve everything. He stared at his hands. It's too late. I lost my home. I lost Charlotte. Violet's face softened, her bravado crumbling. I wanted this to be our fresh start, but maybe it's not meant to be. Ethan looked at her, then shook his head. I need to be better for my child, for myself. I can't keep lying. Not to you, not to Charlotte. She nodded quietly, tears in her eyes. Maybe it's for the best. Later, as Ethan stepped out into the crisp autumn sunlight, he felt the sting of regret, but also a fragile glimmer of hope. The sale might keep him from financial ruin, but it couldn't heal the damage done to those he loved. The only thing left was to own his mistakes and try day by day to be the father his child deserved, even if he'd already lost almost everything else. The dawn truly was new, a hard-won beginning carved from the ruins of his old life. As he watched the city wake up, Ethan vowed he would never let greed and fear dictate his choices again. Maybe in time he'd be worthy of forgiveness. Maybe in time he'd find his way home. In the end, the nursery furniture that was meant to cradle a precious new life became the backdrop to a drama of heartbreak and reckoning. Deceit led to scandal, and secrets tore apart what once seemed unbreakable. But in every ending, there's a seed of a new beginning. Charlotte found her strength refusing to let betrayal define her or her baby's future. Ethan, forced to confront the ruins of his own making, glimpsed a path to redemption, if only he dared to walk it with honesty and humility. Violet, too, learned that chasing illusions has consequences far greater than she'd ever imagined. If this story gripped your heart and kept you on the edge of your seat, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe. Help us spread these real-life drama tales so we can continue bringing you the twists and turns that remind us how fragile and precious our choices truly are.